American Revolution. This is much bigger than the European Union. This is not just a little bit of money. This is the biggest planned transfer of monetary and political power in the history of the planet.
Thanks for joining me, your host, Pastor Chris Morgan, for today's current events in the world we are living in. Today, I'll be sharing with you part 2 of our 2-part series on geoengineering. I want to encourage you, if you haven't seen part 1, go back and watch that, because as you connect it, it will be really helpful. I'm calling it the Climate Science Agenda because in it, I'll be connecting the dots between geoengineering and the climate change agenda, as geoengineering can be defined as deliberate climate change. And as you're about to learn, the real damage that is being created by geoengineering is just part of the biggest plan to transfer political and monetary power in the history of the world.
We are definitely getting climate change from the geoengineering program. There's no doubt whatsoever.
Whether it's cloud seeding, whether it's contrails, whether it's spraying particles in the atmosphere, all these different techniques are being used to manipulate the public to say that there's a global warming problem.
In 2010, the World Meteorological Organization released a report which listed 42 countries engaged in full-time weather modification activities. This list is just from the US alone.
The Our Common Future Climate Change Conference in Paris was a precursor to COP21, also known as the Paris Climate Agreement. What it did, it created the framework to legalize geoengineering and other climate legislation and mandates.
Limiting warming to 2C will be a difficult challenge. Reaching it will require rethinking, reinventing many aspects of energy systems, relationships, and lifestyles.
Everything we're seeing in terms of climate change policy is predicated on climate models that source CO2 as being the cause of our climate change.
I cannot give you the accurate assessment of that, how much is being contributed by CO2, how much the contribution of the black carbon. It still need to be investigated. When we talk about the emission and reducing the emissions and how to reduce the black carbon generated out of the jet airliner should be considered to be taken into account properly. If you don't include that at all in the climate change modeling, so I'm quite sure that the models will not be accurate.
So far, I haven't seen a single climate change model that included geoengineering. What it means to the models is that the models are inadequate to explain what's happening in the atmosphere.
If the data going into a climate change model is flawed, everything downline from that is flawed as well.
Climate agreements are meaningless if it's based on phony science.
If you were to look at it and factor in all of the important factors, you would factor in the actual geoengineering that's been accomplished to date, stuff that's been sprayed in the atmosphere. If you had a climate model that incorporated all these different things into it, I don't think you would come anywhere close to what the United Nations is relying on as settled science.
Ongoing geoengineering programs are the cause of most, if not all, the changes that we're seeing. And any climate model that is not including the ongoing geoengineering programs, without question, is flawed at best, fraudulent at the very worst.
The spit out conclusions X, Y, and Z, therefore you need to do A, B, and C. Completely bogus. But it works for them.
To make any judgment based upon those models would be just deceit and fraud.
The Paris Summit in December of 2015 made specific provision to legitimatize geoengineering.
There are 193 nations that have signed up, as far away as the islands of Tonga.
These climate agreements, they've created the framework to legalize geoengineering without our input or without the input of our legislators.
They will now have the teeth to push through anything they want with any nation, anywhere.
Now the moral restraint has been removed if you will, by the United Nations to open the door for legitimate, fully in the open geoengineering projects.
This is literally the biggest issue in the history of the planet.
The climate is always changing. It always has changed. It always will change. The question is to what extent humans are influencing the change.
They said, no more time for debate. Let's get on with solving the problem. Let's have the carbon tax and let's give us the control. Forget the debate. Science is settled. Well, it turns out that it's not even close to settled. There's no consensus at all.
The fact is, over the last several years, there have been scandal after scandal on the misuse and mismanagement of climate data. Even by itself, with this level of fraud, should throw the whole case out.
I took it upon myself to start investigating a lot of areas outside my traditional research topics, like the attribution of 20th century climate change and climate sensitivity, and found that I could not support the conclusions from the IPCC.
The government-funded scientific community all pretty much march in lockstep. They don't criticize each other. They do what is popular because that's what gets them funding.
The price that you pay in terms of your career for speaking out is really rather huge in terms of it's hard to get government grants and get your papers through peer review. Advancements into administration positions is pretty much precluded. You're ignored in terms of professional recognition, in terms of awards and things like that. So you pay a very big price, and academic scientists aren't going to pay that kind of price for a small amount of funding. There was a lot of bullying and interference with the peer review process, violation of the protocols established by the ICC, attempts to get journal editors fired. And then I started learning more about the IPCC and all the politicization that had gone on throughout the history. I go, whoa, okay. Then I said, why have I been defending the IPCC and trusting their conclusions over my own judgment?
The Hegelian dialectic says that in order to create this major change, you need to have a problem and then a solution. Climate change is the crisis. The solution is sustainable development, implementation of sustainable development worldwide.
The main goal of climate change is to bring about the state of sustainable development. That's the United Nations' own agenda.
Climate change, whether real or invented, is the perfect vehicle that allows for the implementation of United Nations Agenda 21 Sustainable Development. This is the United Nations plan to make the Framework Convention on Climate Change legally binding on the nations that agree to it.
The United Nations has stated many times that this is a global agenda. They've had their consensus meetings around the world and everybody has bought in.
It's the blueprint to inventory and control all land, all water, all minerals, all plants, all animals, all construction, all means of production, and all human beings in the world.
The United Nations has pointed about this themselves on how the capitalistic system that has ruled for the last 150 years is going to be completely changed, transformed, they say, into this new green economy that will be based and regulated on energy and resources. The United Nations itself claims that implementing all the climate change policies and the things related to starting up on sustainable development is going to cost some $90 trillion. When you consider the magnitude of the money that's going to flow because of what the United Nations is doing, you've got to follow the money and look on the other side to see who's going to receive that money.
We have a huge economic transfer of industry into this new green industry. And these are not going to be, well, I want to get involved with this industry. This is going to be a dictatorial industry. It's going to be corporations literally demanding what we do.
The money's not going to go to the people. The money's going to go to the corporations that are sitting out there with these giant nets ready to capture the money flow. This is a transfer of wealth. It's a consolidation of wealth.
This is much bigger than the American Revolution. This is much bigger than the European Union. This is not just a little bit of money. This is the biggest planned transfer of monetary and political power in the history of the planet.
They get people emotionally involved. They manipulate them to support the things that they want them to support.
What the goal is to create this concept that humanity itself is the enemy.
It seems pretty clear that no nation, however powerful, is in a position to do these things unilaterally on its own, so it's going to have to be an international decision capability.
When you start thinking about deployment decisions that potentially have profound impacts on countries' well-beings, you're probably going to end up back in the UN and the Security Council and things like that.
The actual practical constraints necessary for any actor to achieve a sustained, non-trivial deflection of global climate require more than just the money and the technological savvy. It requires something like the command of territory, the world stature, and the military force to prevail against a bunch of other powerful nations who want to make you stop.
In contrast to stuff like mitigation efforts, geoengineering isn't just a single country issue. If one country decides to pursue this, it's going to affect the whole world. So that raises some sort of novel governance challenges that aren't present for a lot of the other aspects of climate change.
The problem being global suggests that the solution has to be global as well.
Do we want to give somebody who we didn't elect the power to spray toxins on us? If you control the weather, you control the world. It's as simple as that.
When you play with nature, you can't guarantee the result.
We need to realize that this small group of criminal elites are counting on misinforming us and us believing their misinformation. They are counting on us believing their lies.
Our entire planet is in jeopardy.
We'll have greater droughts, we'll have greater floods, we'll have massive variations in temperatures.
Geoengineering is a threat, and geoengineering is the key to understanding climate change. And to stop climate change, we have to stop geoengineering.
And that's well said and the fact. Now, thanks to filmmaker and activist Michael J. Murphy's unconventional grays documentation, you can see why and how geoengineering and the climate science agenda is dangerously connected. Don't forget, if you like the content, if it's helped, please consider subscribing and consider leaving a like, a comment, and sharing it with others will help get this word out. And until next time, know this, Jesus loves you and He is Lord. I'll see you next time.